"Marry me by Friday." No questions. She whispered it at my sister's engagement party, a woman I was sure I'd never laid eyes on, and I already had the word no halfway up my throat. Then she leaned in and said,
"Please, Wheels."
and the whole room went silent and roaring at the same time, because there was exactly one person on this earth who ever called me that. And she disappeared from my life in the middle of the night 20 years ago without saying goodbye. I need to back up, because a name like that, dropped into a crowded room by a stranger who isn't a stranger, doesn't make sense until you understand what it cost me the first time I lost it.
I'm Sam Wheeler. I'm 34, a cabinet maker in a small town in Michigan.
The kind of place where the hardware store still writes your total on a paper pad and everybody's grandfather knew everybody else's. I build things with my hands for a living kitchen cabinets, built-in shelves, the occasional dining table somebody wants to hand down to their kids. I'm good at it because I'm patient and because wood is honest. You cut it wrong, it tells you. You rush it, it splits. You respect it, measure twice, take your time, and it'll hold a house together for 100 years. People are harder. People I never got the hang of the way I got the hang of maple and oak. That's part of this whole story, so I'll put it out front. I was a widower 2 years by the night of that party. My wife, Rachel, died of an aggressive thing that came on fast and took her in 8 months. And I'm not going to spend your time trying to describe that, because there aren't words that do it, and anybody who's been through it already knows. What I'll tell you is that Rachel was good and kind, and I loved her, and that our marriage had a quiet in it I could never quite name, until later a sense that I was a careful, decent husband who kept one door in himself shut, even to her. She knew it. She told me once, near the end, when she'd gotten to that place where people stop being polite about the truth. "You love me, Sam," she said, "but there's a room in you I never got the key to. I hope someday somebody does. You shouldn't keep it locked your whole life." I didn't understand what she meant. Or I did, and I didn't want to. That locked room had a name, and the name was Nora Keller. Nora lived next door to me from the time we were 6 until the year we turned 14. There was a chain-link fence between our backyards with a gap at the bottom where the ground had washed out, and I swear half my childhood happened in the 4 feet on either side of that gap. Nora Keller was the funniest, fiercest, most stubborn person I knew. She could throw a baseball harder than any boy in our grade, and she read books thick as bricks, and she gave everybody nicknames, whether they wanted them or not. I was Wheeler, so I was Wheels. It started as a joke she said I rolled through life not paying attention, which at 10 years old I took as a grave insult, and at 34 I understand was the truest thing anybody ever said about me. She was the only person who ever called me that. She guarded it, actually. Once my cousin tried to pick it up and Nora told him to find his own name for me, that one was taken. I didn't understand at 10 what it meant that a girl wanted a private name for you. I understand now. We grew up in that gap in the fence. We caught frogs and lost them. We built a fort out of pallets my dad was going to burn. We sat out on summer nights when it was too hot to sleep and talked about everything and nothing, the way you can only talk to one person in your life if you're lucky, the person you don't have to translate yourself for. By the time we were 14, something had started to change between us the way it does, quiet and terrifying. When a friendship you've had your whole life starts turning into something with weight. I remember the exact week I realized I looked at Nora Keller different than I looked at anybody else. It was late that spring. She'd caught me looking, and instead of teasing me the way she teased me about everything, she'd gone quiet and a little pink, and she'd said, "Don't be weird about it, Wheels." Which in Nora language meant me too, but I'm scared, so let's not. We were 14. We had time. That's what you think at 14. You think you have all the time in the world. We had about a week. I woke up one Saturday morning in June and the Kellers were gone. Not moving out, gone. The house next door sat empty, curtains still up, a kid's bike still in the yard. Like the family had evaporated between midnight and dawn. My mother said a truck had come in the night. Nobody knew anything. There was no goodbye, no note through the gap in the fence, no phone call, nothing. Their phone was disconnected within the day. My letters to the only address I could dig up came back stamped no such recipient. The adults spoke about it in low voices that stopped when I came into the room, and when I pushed, All I ever got was that the Kellers had some trouble and had gone to family somewhere, and that it wasn't a boy my age's business, and that I should let it be. I never let it be. Not really. I let it look like I let it be, which is a different thing, and something I turned out to be very good at. I grew up. I took over a corner of my life and built it steady and quiet. I dated. Eventually I married Rachel. And I meant it. And I built us a good life with my careful hands. But there was a 14-year-old boy in me who stood at a gap in a fence for 20 years, wondering what he did wrong, why she left without a word. Whether she ever thought about him at all, and that boy, it turns out, was the one holding the key to the room Rachel could never get into. So, my sister Beth's engagement party. A rented hall, string lights, 100 people I half knew, and me with my coat practically on because 2 years a widower had made me an expert at leaving early, and a woman I didn't recognize crossing the room straight at me with a purpose that made me look behind myself to see who she was really aiming for. There was nobody behind me. She was my age, give or take. Dark blonde hair, tired eyes, a nice dress she wore like armor. And she came right up into my space, close, and said those 7 words, "Marry me," by Friday. No questions, and I had the no loaded and ready. The automatic no of a sensible man, and then she said, "Please, Wheels," and my whole life tilted on its side. I looked at her. Really looked. And underneath 20 years and a grown woman's face, there she was. The set of the jaw. The way one eyebrow sat higher than the other, permanently skeptical. Nora Keller, standing in front of me. "Real, Nora," I said. It came out cracked. "Hi, Wheels." Her eyes filled instantly like she'd been holding it back the whole walk across the room. I know this is insane. I know I have no right. Please don't make a scene, and please don't say no until you've heard me out. I don't remember deciding to move. I just found myself steering us both out a side door onto a little concrete patio behind the hall, away from the lights and the noise, my sister's party carrying on without us. And then we stood there in the cool dark. 2 people who'd last stood this close at 14 years old with a chain-link fence between them, and I could not for the life of me find a single one of the 10,000 things I'd spent 20 years wanting to say. What I finally said was, "You didn't say goodbye." Of everything I could have led with. But it was the thing. It was the whole thing, the splinter that had been under the skin for 2 decades. Her face crumpled. "I know. You were just gone. I woke up and the house was empty, and I thought, Nora, I thought I did something. I was 14. I spent that entire summer thinking I said something wrong, or scared you off, or you didn't do anything." Her voice broke. "God, Wheels, you didn't do a single thing. That's the part I couldn't ever get to you. It was never you." She wrapped her arms around herself. "I didn't get to say goodbye, because they wouldn't let me. My dad, we left in the night, because we had to leave in the night. Do you understand what I'm telling you? You don't wake the neighbors when you're running from somebody. And the somebody was in our house. The night air felt different all of a sudden. Your dad." She nodded and looked at the ground, and told me the thing the adults had spoken about in those low voices that stopped when I walked in. Her father. What it had been like in that house on the other side of the fence, in the rooms I never saw, while she was climbing under it to sit in my backyard where it was safe. How her mother had finally gotten them out the only way you can get out of something like that, fast, silent in the middle of the night, to a shelter 3 states away, and then to a new town, and a new name for a couple of years, and a childhood that turned overnight into a thing built entirely around not being found. "I wanted to write you," she said. "For years. My mom said no. She said any thread back to the old life was a thread he could pull, and she wasn't wrong, Sam. He looked for us for a long time. By the time it was safe, by the time I was grown and out on my own, it had been so many years I'd convinced myself you'd forgotten the whole thing. That you'd grown up and moved on, and the last thing you needed was some ghost from the 4th grade turning up to stir it all back. 20 years. I'd spent 20 years believing she left because of something in me, and the truth was she'd been carried out of her own life in the dark by a mother saving both their lives, and had spent those same 20 years believing I wouldn't want to be found. Two people on opposite sides of a wall neither of us knew was made of nothing but fear and other people's damage. I never forgot, I said. Not one day of it. Not you. She looked up, and something moved across her face that I felt in my chest. But you didn't come find me now to tell me that, I said, because as much as I wanted to stand in that reunion forever, the 7 words were still hanging in the air. You came to ask me to marry you by Friday, so you'd better tell me the rest of it. And she told me about Ellie. Nora had a sister, younger by 4 years, born after they'd fled, in the new life, a kid who never knew the old town or the fence or any of it. Her name was Jenna, and Jenna had a little girl named Ellie, 6 years old. And 8 months ago, Jenna had died. A car accident. Sudden. Senseless. The kind of thing that doesn't give anybody time to plan for anything. And Ellie's father had never been in the picture. So the little girl had gone to the only person who'd ever really been her family, Nora, her aunt, who had, without hesitation and without a second thought, taken a grieving 6-year-old into her 1-bedroom apartment and started building her whole life around keeping that child safe and loved. And it's been working, Nora said. And now the tears were coming freely, and she wasn't fighting them. It's been hard, and it's been beautiful, and she's Sam. She's the best thing that ever happened to me. She's funny and stubborn, and she reminds me of me, God help her. But there's a custody hearing on Friday. A hearing. Jenna's ex-husband's family. Ellie's father's parents. They're not bad people, I want to be fair. They're not monsters. But they're in Arizona, and they've got money, and a big house, and they've decided that a single woman in a 1-bedroom apartment who works 2 jobs isn't a stable enough home for their granddaughter, and they've petitioned for custody, and their lawyer has spent 3 months making me look like exactly what they say I am. She wiped her face with the heel of her hand. Hard. Angry. The hearing's Friday. And my lawyer, who I can barely afford, told me the single biggest thing working against me is that I'm alone. That a 2-parent household, a stable married home, changes the whole picture. That if the judge sees a family instead of a struggling single woman, everything shifts. The pieces came together, and I felt the ground under the whole strange night finally go solid. So you need to be married by Friday. I know how it sounds, she said. I know exactly how it sounds. Desperate and crazy and unfair to drag you into. I'm not Sam. I swear to you I am not asking you to actually. It's paper. It's a piece of paper that makes a judge see a household instead of a hard luck case. And after, once Ellie's safe, you'd be free. I'd never ask you for another thing as long as I live. Why me? She stopped. You could have married anybody for a piece of paper, I said. A friend. Somebody in that new life of yours. Why did you drive back to the town you fled from and walk into my sister's party and ask me? And here's where she told me the thing I'd forgotten. And she never had. Because of the last week, she said quietly. Before we left. Do you not remember? I didn't. I told her I didn't. That last week, before the night we ran, my dad had been bad, worse than usual, and I came to school with a mark on my arm I couldn't hide, and everybody either didn't notice or pretended not to, because that's what people did back then. Except you noticed. You didn't say anything dumb about it. You didn't make it a thing. You just, at lunch, you gave me your jacket. It was warm out, Sam. There was no reason, and you just draped it over my shoulders so the sleeve covered the mark, and you never said one word about why. And you kept me next to you the whole rest of the day so nobody could ask. Her voice was barely holding. You were 14 years old, and you protected me, and you did it so gently I could keep my dignity. And I have thought about that jacket for 20 years, when my whole world was people who hurt me, or people who looked away. There was exactly one person who saw me and stepped in front of it without making me pay for it with my pride. And when Jenna died, and I looked around at my whole life and asked myself who on this earth I would trust with the most important thing I have with Ellie, there was only one name. It was always going to be you. It was you at 14, and it's you now. I didn't come here because you were convenient. I came here because you're the only safe person I've ever known. I had to turn away for a second and look at the parking lot lights, because a grown man crying at his sister's engagement party is a lot to explain. Now I want to be honest about what I did next, because it wasn't the movie version. I didn't sweep her up and say yes on the spot. I'm a measure twice man. What I said was, I need to meet her. Ellie, before I say anything. Because if I do this, I'm not doing it as a favor to you that I take back later. If I put my name on that little girl's household, I need to know what I'm actually promising. And I need to mean it. So I can't answer you tonight. But I can meet you tomorrow. Nora looked at me like I'd handed her something she'd stopped believing existed. That's yeah. Yes, okay, and then, small. That's exactly the answer I should have known you'd give. I met Ellie the next morning at a pancake place off the highway. She was 6 and serious and had a gap where a front tooth used to be, and she inspected me over the top of a menu with a suspicion I respected enormously. She asked me if I really made furniture, and I said I did. And she asked if I could make a bed for her stuffed rabbit, who had, and I quote, a spinal condition and required elevation. I said I could build a rabbit bed with adjustable elevation and full lumbar support, and she stared at me for a long moment and then declared, to Nora, he's okay. Which, I would learn, was the highest praise Ellie Keller handed out. By the end of the pancakes, she'd migrated around the booth to sit next to me and was showing me the rabbit's spinal condition in clinical detail, and Nora was watching the two of us with a look on her face I'm not going to try to describe, because I'd get it wrong. I said yes in the parking lot. Not to Nora, to Ellie. Sort of, in my own head, watching her buckle the rabbit carefully into the car. But out loud to Nora, I said, okay, let's get married by Friday. She started crying in the middle of a pancake house parking lot, and I did the thing I'd wanted to do for 20 years and never gotten to, which was reach out and pull Nora Keller into a hug. And she held on like the fence had never been there at all. The next 3 days were a blur of the least romantic wedding preparation in the history of the institution, a rushed appointment at the county clerk, a favor called in from a judge Beth knew, the frantic assembling of the world's most unglamorous paperwork. I told Beth the truth, all of it, because I don't lie to my sister, and because I needed a witness who understood what she was witnessing. Beth, who had known about the Kellers, who had watched 14-year-old me haunt that fence all summer, listened to the whole thing with her hand over her mouth and then said, Sam, you understand you've been in love with this woman since before you knew what the word meant. I told her it wasn't like that. It was about Ellie. It was a legal thing to protect a child. Beth just looked at me the way sisters look at you when you're lying, and you both know it. We married on Thursday afternoon, the day before the hearing, in a courthouse room with Beth and her fiancé as witnesses, and Ellie in a dress she'd picked herself holding a bouquet of gas station flowers with total ceremonial seriousness. It was supposed to be paper. That's what we'd agreed, both of us, out loud more than once. This is paper. This is for Ellie. No expectations, no pressure. We'll sort out the rest later. And then the moment came to say the words, and I took Nora Keller's hands in the room where 20 years of not knowing had led us, and I looked at her, and neither one of us could pretend, in that specific held breath, that it was only paper. I said my part and my voice wasn't steady. She said hers with tears running down her face. And when the judge said the thing judges say, I leaned in and kissed her, careful and brief, and it landed like the answer to a question I'd been asking since I was 14 years old at a gap in a fence. The hearing was Friday morning, and I'm not going to pretend it was a movie courtroom with a dramatic speech. It was a small, plain room and a tired judge and a lot of documents. But it mattered that we walked in together. It mattered that when the other side's lawyer painted Nora as an unstable single woman scraping by, there was a married household on the record. A home with 2 incomes and a spare room I'd already started converting. A husband who stood up when asked and spoke plainly about the family we were building and the little girl at the center of it. And it mattered, this is the part I'll never forget, that when the judge asked Ellie, gently in that careful way they do, who she wanted to live with, that solemn 6-year-old looked around the room and said, Aunt Nora. And Sam builds beds for rabbits with bad backs. So also, Sam. Even the judge smiled. We kept her. The judge granted Nora custody, with a visitation arrangement for the Arizona grandparents that was honestly fair, and that I've come to think is good for Ellie. A kid can't have too many people who love her. Nora cried in the hallway afterward so hard she couldn't stand. And I held her up, and Ellie wrapped herself around both our legs, and a family that had started as a piece of paper 3 days earlier stood in a courthouse hallway and was suddenly, undeniably, real. Here's the part nobody tells you about a marriage that's supposed to be pretend. You can't fake a household. You can fake a wedding, sign the paper, tell yourselves it's temporary, but then you're actually living it. You're making coffee for two. You're building a rabbit bed with adjustable elevation at your workbench at 10 at night because you promised a 6-year-old. You're learning that Nora still throws harder than any grown man you know, that she reads books thick as bricks, that she gives everybody nicknames Ellie as Bug, I'm Still and Forever Wheels. You're lying awake in a house that finally has noise in it, understanding for the first time exactly what Rachel meant about the locked room. Because someone had finally turned the key, and it turned out the room wasn't empty. It had been waiting. We never did have the conversation about ending it. The quietly get divorced once Ellie's safe plan just dissolved, the way morning fog does, without anybody deciding anything. About a month in, on a night after Ellie was asleep, Nora and I were sitting on the back porch of the little house I'd bought, and I finally asked her the question I'd been holding since the party. Was it ever just about Ellie? For you? Coming to find me? She was quiet a long time. Then she said, I told myself it was. It was the reason that let me be brave enough to walk into that party. But Sam, I could have asked somebody else. There were easier somebodies. I drove 4 hours back to the one town I swore I'd never set foot in again, to find the one boy I never got to say goodbye to, and I told myself it was practical. She reached over and took my hand. It was never practical. I've been half finished around leaving you since I was 14. I think part of me came back to finally finish the sentence. And what's the end of the sentence? She smiled through the start of tears. I don't know yet. I think we get to write it. That's kind of the whole point, isn't it? Nobody made us run this time. Nobody's deciding for us. We just get to choose. So we chose. Slow, after that real slow. On purpose. Because we'd both learned the hard way that the things that last are the things you don't rush. We were already married, which is a strange way to do it. Backward from how everybody else does. Falling in love with your own spouse a piece at a time. But it turned out to be the right way for us. We had 20 years to make up and a 6-year-old learning to trust that the adults in her life would still be there in the morning, and none of that is work you can do fast. We did it anyway. We're still doing it. Ellie's rabbit, for the record, sleeps in a hand-built bed with full lumbar support on our daughter's nightstand in the room I converted the week before the hearing. She calls me Sam still, mostly, but a few months ago she started sometimes calling me Dad by accident and then getting embarrassed about it, and I've learned to just let it go by without making it a thing, the way somebody once taught me to let a hard thing go by so a person can keep their dignity. Nora caught me doing it once. Caught the whole careful nothing of it, and she looked at me across the kitchen with her eyes wet and mouthed the jacket, and I understood that some kindnesses just keep going, hand to hand, year to year, if you let them. 20 years ago, a girl disappeared from the house next door in the middle of the night, and I stood at a gap in a fence and believed I'd done something to make her go. I spent 2 decades with a locked room in my chest that even a good marriage couldn't open, believing the boy who waited at that fence was just a thing I'd outgrow. And then that girl walked back into my life at my sister's party, whispered 7 impossible words, and called me by the name only she ever used, and it turned out she hadn't come to ask me for a favor at all. She'd come to hand me back the key. I almost said no. I had the word right there in my throat. I will be grateful for the rest of my life that she said my name before I could get it out.